sometimes I can be a bit more open to uncertainty if I'm not thrilled about the certainty. So if there's a certainty that says, well, if you stay here, this is where it's going, and knowing, oh, I'm not sure if that's aligned with me, and I can take another path and there's a lot of uncertainty on it. But at least in uncertainty, anything's possible. And that could be better than my wildest dreams.
The first person we lead is ourself. Welcome to Because This Matters, a podcast about leading from the inside out. I'm Mark Poise, and in each conversation, we explore how values take shape and become action, how people with clarity navigate change, challenge, and growth with intention. My guest today is Cara Hawkins. Cara's life has taken some fascinating turns. She grew up overseas before studying Arabic and international affairs, then began her career as a foreign policy analyst in the UAE. From there, she made an unexpected shift into teaching yoga, continuing an inner journey that began in her teens, spent time on a remote Greek island and in India, and eventually returned to Australia, where she now works in coaching, strategy, and change management. She also hosts the podcast Life, Leadership, and Change with Cara Hawkins. Across all of those experiences, a common thread emerges: a deep curiosity about change, how people, organizations, and even societies navigate complexity, find clarity, and move toward greater connection. Cara, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
So our listeners got a little sampling, which is barely a glimpse of the Cara that I've gotten to know over several years. If we were to just take a snapshot today, what would you say are the values that drive you as you observe your life and work in the world?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question, and especially when we're looking at a snapshot of today. So one of the biggest ones for me is curiosity and continuously learning. Another one for me is slightly more recent, and that is a sense of play. So bringing play into every part of my life, and creativity, and leaning into that more and looking at the different ways that that can show up in life. And I think the last one is really connection. So connection to self, connection to others, connection to place, purpose, and something bigger than yourself.
You know, for somebody who does all the things that I just read off as an introduction, I imagine that some people might be surprised to hear such light and exploratory things like play and creativity.
Yeah, so the play as a value is definitely one that I think I've valued more recently. I grew up quite serious and responsible, possibly, the eldest daughter kind of situation. And I still was, quite playful, but I think, I placed heavy responsibility on myself, and I still do, but being able to carry that with lightness and playfulness and not taking things so seriously has really shifted more recently for me, and just being able to enjoy it more along the way. I think not taking things as seriously enables me to still do the work that I do and show up in the way that I want to with a less tight grip.
How do you, in this modern world, that's a reverse direction of where most people go, as far as holding things more loosely as you do your work. How did you make that change?
How did I make that change? I don't know if it was a conscious one. I think that it's something that arose that I now have come to a point where I realize how important it is in my life. And I think it has also come through some really challenging periods of like, okay, well, I have gone through, being very serious and some heavier things. And it's like, okay, but really valuing where play can come in and putting everything in perspective, I think has helped. And it's not to say that there aren't really serious, important things happening, and they deserve, that seriousness in context. But But I think that it does tie to the creativity and being able to have that self-expression, to be less judgmental of yourself and to be able to explore more without the judgment, without the rigidity, having the beginner's mindset and being able to have fun along the way because, we're here for a pretty short time. So let's enjoy it.
Yeah, gosh, anytime when that phrase beginner's mind comes up, I just, I'm completely on board.
Yeah, and I'm not great at it. I'm definitely learning to take that on a lot more.
How do you cultivate a beginner's mind?
Through a lot of observing my own thoughts around it, which I was reflecting on this, and I think I've been very lucky in that some of the things that society values, for example, like, the academic work, I just happened to, be okay at, without, I worked hard, I worked very hard, but I could generally pick things up to an acceptable standard. Most things I tried, which was great. But it also means that if I don't get things quite quickly, I get quite frustrated with myself and I have to really work with myself and sit with myself and look at, okay, but it's all right to be in this space and it's okay to learn more. And so actually not being good at things has really helped that, but it's definitely a work in progress because, I have tried some things recently and also gotten really positive feedback, which is very sweet, but it doesn't help the beginner's mindset. So maybe I'm surrounded by very kind people. But I genuinely have to work on continuing the things that I don't feel are picking up maybe at the pace that I had expected, which comes from, nowhere, like my own expectations are just made up from nothing. So it's definitely a process.
I was gonna start digging into where these came from, and you just like kind of mic dropped with like, oh, these just came up from nothing. What are your thoughts about where these things arise? Do you trace them to a part of your maybe earlier adulthood, young adulthood, childhood, or maybe somewhere else, or do they just kind of arise and that's what we find?
Do you mean in terms of the expectations that we put upon ourselves?
Yeah, expectations and also naturally these values, the ones that are core for you. How do these end up being the ones that you realize are driving you?
I think that our own journeys probably shape them quite significantly. I think for me, my journey has shaped what I've valued, but that has also been layered upon what I started with, which is, my family system, the community I grew up in, or communities, the cultural systems that we all grow up in, and our unique interactions with that. And so I would say my values came from a combination about what was valued around me, and my interaction with that. And then as I grew up, I was able to refine what were kind of adopted, conditioned values, and then look at, okay, what do I want to keep? What do I want to change? What do I want to shift away from and turn towards different ones? And I think that's probably been a constant process for me. There are some that really have been lasting, but then others that have maybe evolved only in definition.
That process that you went through, was that intuitive that you could do that?
It was a very, very long and still ongoing process. I think part of it was intuitive, but I definitely got a lot of support along the way. And I think being able to have that support to reflect on where these values, where these expectations came from really helped me with that self-examination of, why do I define success that way? Where did that actually come from? Is that what I want to keep? What parts of it do I want to keep? And what parts of it do I want to change?
Yeah. The critical mind, like that critical reflective in a good way mind that you're exhibiting is something that people kind of discover at different stages along their own life, right? And all of us are naturally different. But can you trace a time before you notice your mind being that way, or does that always kind of show up in the experience of being you as you've been alive?
I think I've always had an analytical mind, which translated as a kid to being, I think as my grandma called it, a warrior, and not a warrior like a soldier, a warrior as in like someone who worries. And so I think that was somewhat inbuilt. So I guess nature forms a part of that. But I think also growing up in different countries gave me different perspectives on the world, on life, on privilege. And I think probably when I was around 14 was when I started really being forced actually to understand or to separate myself from my thoughts. And I did not get it immediately. Like I took a very, very long time to latch on to what was going on. But that was sort of that beginning of being able to step back and be like, okay, this is the thinking me and this is the observing me. And that has probably shaped a big part of my life now.
You've given some lip service to growing up in different countries. Could you speak to how your sense of sort of stability and self and belonging was shaped by something that shifted through growing up?
Yes. So that was something that I really had to work on as a teenager and in my early 20s because I didn't feel like I had much of that, the stability, sense of self, or sense of belonging. So it was definitely something that I created for myself as an adult. I mean, I grew up in a very wonderful family, but we were moving a lot. So I was born in the West Bank, in Bethlehem, and we stayed there for about 4 years. We spent a bit of time back in Australia, and then we spent close to 4 years in Cambodia in the mid to late 90s before coming back to Australia. And I really value those experiences. But as you said, there was a lot of moving at a very young age, and I'm really grateful for all the people I met. Actually, my best friend from Cambodia when I was 8, I met up with the other day, and that was wonderful. And that has so many benefits, but that sense of belonging was really missing because my mum tells a story of me coming home one day from school and asking her, "Where am I from?" Because the kids are asking and I don't know. And she's, told me, "You're from Australia." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And people asked me what the capital was. And I was like, I couldn't tell you any city names. People were like, "Is it Sydney?" I was like, yeah, I guess so. So it's not Canberra, for the record. I do know that now. And so coming back to Australia as a 9 or 10-year-old and then coming to a school in Australia was such a massive contrast because no one could really relate to the experiences I'd had overseas. No one even knew where Cambodia was. The level of privilege was wild compared to where I'd been, even though I was in an international school. Just Canberra especially is a very well-off city. And so there was always a sense of not belonging in the place that I was meant to belong. And so, yeah, that was definitely a journey growing up. Probably in my 20s was when I really addressed, like, what does stability mean? What does belonging mean? What is my sense of self and identity? And honestly, wasn't until I moved to Melbourne about 3 years ago that I found that sense of belonging. And even then I wasn't really sure where in Melbourne. And it wasn't until a few weeks ago I actually bought a house for the first time in my life. And so for me, that's huge because I'm creating that stability and that sense of groundedness in a place where I feel like I can belong, which for me is a first in my life. So I'm very grateful for that.
What did you find there that felt different to you?
I think it was a combination of where I was in myself. I don't necessarily think if I'd come to Melbourne 10 years ago that I would have found the same thing. So a combination of where I was for myself and something about the city. And I think there are a couple of other cities. I really love Adelaide as well, where there might be similar, but there's so much diversity, so much creativity, so much culture. And from what I found, like an open-mindedness to different ways of living. And for me, that's really important. I felt quite challenged in areas or cities where it felt like there were maybe one or two paths that you take in life. And there was no judgment for taking other paths. There wasn't really an understanding of what that looked like. And so in Melbourne, I feel lots of people do lots of different things and that's all fine.
Are there any like particular formative forces around these ones that are guiding you now? You know, the curiosity, continuous learning, play, creativity, and connection. Maybe it's mentors, people that had an impact on you, or particularly intense experiences that pivoted you toward these along the way.
Yeah. Well, I've been very lucky to have a lot of amazing people around me in different chapters of life, and I'm always learning from them wherever I go, and I'm always very grateful for that. I think the biggest experience has definitely shaped me and sort of felt like it triggered the series of events that have got me to this value was when I was about 14 or 15 and experiencing some significant mental health challenges. And I had a severe eating disorder and spent 3 months in hospital with that. And it turned out it was undiagnosed PTSD, which wasn't really known much about at the time. And I'm so grateful for that experience because that is what helped me really turn inward and start learning about the foundations around connection to self, around being able to observe your thoughts, around nervous system regulation, which I had never heard of back then. That was sort of more something I learned more in my 20s. And having that perspective on top of the moving around the world, while it felt very disconnecting at the time, the same as the moving around the world, I feel like it was those extremes of disconnection that helped me value connection so much, and to be able to chart a path and necessarily sort of have those reckonings with self to find a way back to self and to really value what all of that brings while continuously learning how to strengthen that and navigate it through all the curveballs that life inevitably throws at us in, every stage.
That's a really courageous path to walk. I first appreciate you sharing it with the people that listen to this, because it's easy to skirt by it and kind of give it less formal lip service. But it's such an important thing because of what you just said you took away from it. There are certain things that you gained that you wouldn't have gained otherwise. For people that navigate that or maybe will navigate something that is their own version of that in their lives, are there any nuggets of wisdom that you could share that would be helpful to them?
One lesson that I've taken from all the, more intense challenges, such as that one, has been a deepening trust in myself and an opening to connect with something that's bigger than me. And I don't obviously wish that upon people. And I also wouldn't want to devalue anyone's challenging experiences. If it does feel available and open in those times or even after, I think sometimes they can be the gateways to the deepest spiritual growth that you could possibly experience.
So say yes and accept it is kind of what I'm hearing. I'm also thinking about these chapters of your life where you taught yoga. You
Yes.
you went even more unique places before you found this greater connection where you are now. What's your relationship with ambition as those changes have unfolded?
Huge changes in how I saw ambition. I joke, but it's probably quite true that I feel like I had my version of what society calls a midlife crisis at the age of 23. So that was all part of that. I actually started yoga as part of my recovery when I was about 14, 15. And that was I think therapy is very important. I still do it. It's, definitely an amazing tool. And for what I needed, yoga was probably the thing that had the biggest impact for me. I went to a very traditional yoga school, and having that reconnection to the body and the somatic processes was amazing. So that's when I started. I hated it to start with because I was, moving fast, and I was like, don't make me slow down. But then I was like, okay, probably means that I need it. So I kept at it, and that became a long-standing practice for me. So I went into other fields from a career perspective, And I decided to leave my career in geopolitics at the time, and I was looking at studying behavioral change and behavioral science. And coincidentally, the school that I had applied for, I was put on the merit list, so I didn't know if I was accepted. And so I decided to make other plans, study yoga and just go deeper into that. By the time I got the acceptance, I was already like, no, I'm doing yoga. So I went and did that. And that was for me like a deepening of that practice that I'd started so long ago. But also all the exploration that came around it, and shifting from what at the time was quite, I guess, at least in my head, like a job that had, highest quote unquote status, to sort of starting from the absolute beginning as a teacher after this study and, despite lots of practice, that was a big internal shift that I had to grapple with from an identity perspective, and definitely practice what I preach. But it was also quite a freeing time because it was open for exploration and quite interesting because people that I met that I really got along with, they didn't care what I did. Some of them had no idea I had a career before this. They just thought that that's what I did. And seeing that people still valued me for me rather than for what I did was very unintentional on their part, but so, so valuable to me. And I started really, really re-exploring what success was for me. And I think I can still say I'm quite ambitious, but what that looks like is different. And the checks and balances are different in terms of, being just one track focus. And the caveats on it are different in that there's a lot of ambition to create and to have impact, but with boundaries in place for my own well-being, for, a balance for other things that matter in my life, and not being so focused on, I guess, what's more socially conditioned of what success is. So, high ranking, it's like, no, what have I created? What impact have I managed to make? So that's probably an example of how the value is sort of still there, but the definition is completely different.
If it's okay that I press you on this, how do you define success in this stage of life?
Yeah, well, I've seen some definitions that I really love, and sort of bringing them together. It's it's doing things that you like, doing them in a way that you like and that you're proud of, and being able to spend time with the people that you love. And I think doing things that are meaningful to you, not just make money. And there's nothing wrong with doing a job that pays the bills, for me, as long as, I'm doing other things that bring fulfillment. If that is the case, I do actually enjoy my job quite a bit, but I do introduce a lot of creativity in the work around it. So it's having like a portfolio that is a bit more holistic, that includes joy, impact, and loved ones, time well spent.
So you've done these things where, the yoga teaching, and now you're back in your home country of sorts, and I also know that you've also taken time off or reduced your full-time work at times for creative projects or some of your other special projects relating to coaching, connecting, mentoring, and teaching. And I'm thinking about how each one of those shifts requires great clarity.
Mm.
And that's the theme of this show. Underlying everything is people who operate with clarity. Yet not all times does clarity show up with certainty. And I'm thinking that you've probably navigated a lot of uncertainty when you're pursuing the clarity or following the clarity that's arisen for you. Could you speak to the relationship between clarity and uncertainty along your own path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of clarity has come in retrospect, and sometimes the doing of it has been necessary to find that. And I think sometimes I can be a bit more open to uncertainty if I'm not thrilled about the certainty. So if there's a certainty that says, well, if you stay here, this is where it's going, and knowing, oh, I'm not sure if that's aligned with me, and I can take another path and there's a lot of uncertainty on it, but at least in uncertainty, anything's possible. And that could be better than my wildest dreams. And that is terrifying at first. And to be honest, I think the first times that it happened felt more like a push from the world, life that, pushed me into that. But after having done it a couple of times, actually that gave me a more confidence and trust in myself that I could do it in a, reasoned manner. It's not just jumping into uncertainty anytime something's uncomfortable. It's definitely always moving towards something, not running away. But going to the breaks I had, I also noticed a pattern of how I worked, which is something that it's great awareness for me to work with. So I finished my degree. I moved to Jordan by myself to immerse myself in Arabic because I couldn't do it through uni because of insurance issues of going to the region. So I went there by myself. I, saved my whole degree to go and traveled the region and learned Arabic. And so for me, that was like the first break. Came back, started working, got the job in the UAE, did that very intensively for 2-3 years, and then stepped back and took that break. Initially, it was teaching yoga, but then I moved to a very remote Greek island with the idea of writing a book and just recharging. And then eventually coming back to Australia, going back into work, taking a break to do coaching, going back into full-time, and then scaling back to part-time to do other projects on the side. And I think part of that learning has really been, okay, how to work with my natural pace, because I can very much dive into something intensively, but I also can be prone to burning out if I do that for too long. So how do I personally strike a balance and find something that is more sustainable for me to work on, where, as I mentioned, I get to have that portfolio of different creative activities, enough time with loved ones. And so that's definitely a learning process. But at the time of all those breaks, it was very much exploratory, very much an unknown of what I was going into, but felt like I would get clarity from doing it because I felt I had learned what I could in the place that I was.
I'm thinking about the momentum that so many people operate their lives with. Like one thing just leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And I'm listening to your story and thinking about how you're willing to turn on a dime, so to speak, to follow what's arisen or maybe come up. Did you learn that from somebody? Was it demonstrated for you?
I have to credit my parents for this. They're pretty incredible people. They both met as tour guides leading tours down the Nile in Egypt. Neither of them are Egyptian. They just happen to be there. And we moved around the world a lot, into the unknown a lot. My dad, we moved to Canberra for 6 months for a maternity leave cover that my dad took, not knowing anyone there. And that's where the Cambodia job came up. When he was in Cambodia, there was no job lined up in Australia, but there was a job offer in the UK in a different field. And he chose Australia instead of a guaranteed job in the UK for lifestyle. He's British originally, now Australian, of course. And so he, I guess, and my mum as well, they were always quite willing to step into uncertainty to follow a path that they felt was best for the family, for themselves, for the career, all of those things balanced. And that was sort of just, you leap and you trust yourself to build what you need. But they're always calculated leaps. I think that's the thing. It's always, being able to calculate the risk and what you have available to you. So none of those breaks, for example, I ever took were rash. One of them, was a year or more in the lead up. I always made sure that I had certain buffers. They were always self-funded, but it meant that I made big compromises before and after to enable them. And so I think there's, to put a layer of reality over it, it's, they're always calculated risk, calculated uncertainties within whatever bounds that we operate within.
I really appreciate you sharing that aspect of it, because I'm sure there are some listeners who listen and maybe even fantasize like, oh my gosh, I wish I would exhibit that same kind of freedom in my own life, or maybe I missed an opportunity in the past, or maybe I want to create one in the future. And I feel like you laid out the reasonable, responsible way that you can still have that level of freedom and flexibility.
Yeah, and I think, everyone is different. Everyone's path is different. So, I would never want to compare. And I think, you know, I guess an underlying value has also previously been freedom, but that was in conflict with the belonging. And so a lot of my moving was seeking a sense of belonging, but sort of being scared of giving up that freedom. Um, and so that was an inner process for me, but it also meant that I would not, for example, financially tie myself down in any way. I always kept, very low living costs and still was incredibly privileged in the work and the opportunities that I had, but I still lived my life with this, oh, but if I need to, at least I can, choose differently. I was always scared of feeling trapped. And even now, having a house and a mortgage, that was terrifying to me. But even going into that, it was so calculated and so okay, I can pay this off in this amount of time, and not wanting to overstretch in any way, shape or form, and still be incredibly privileged and lucky to be able to buy it all.
I hear just an intentionality woven through each thing that you're describing, and that none of these things need to unfold accidentally or without care and attention.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the biggest key to lifestyle design, is just intentionality along the way, instead of accidental arrivals, so to speak.
And at the same time, I think that intentionality is also there to create space for the unexpected, because I've had so much of that in Melbourne. And that's where, actually just on my whole life path, being able to create space for the unexpected meant that I could adapt when things beyond my wildest dreams could come in. So, for example, I never planned to move to a remote Greek island. That was not ever on the cards. I just coincidentally had a week in when I was teaching, and all my private students told me they were going on holiday. Happened to be the same week, 'cause it was the middle of summer, so it's not that unexpected. And then it was easy to get my classes covered. I had been living in the desert for however many years, and I just wanted to be near green and water. So I typed in Greek island, green, no tourists, and I like waterfalls. So I put in waterfalls, and I found one, and that's where I went. And I loved it so much. I was only there for a week. I loved it so much that I came home, I finished my private contracts, and within 4 weeks I've moved there, because I sort of had that level of agility at the time. And so I moved there, and it wasn't planned, but that was where it took me. And I'd planned to stay there for a year. But after 4 months, a really amazing course came up in India, and I felt like that what I needed from Greece had completed, and I was ready to go back into the world. Did not think this part through so well, but I went from a 4-house village to Delhi. So that was a bit of a contrast. And then went back into training. And again, I planned to stay in India to be able to study more traditional practices and to get work on the side, not in yoga, but in consulting. And there I, at one point, got sick and had a very profound experience where I felt like I needed to reconnect with my family. And so I recovered, flew back to Australia, and 2 weeks later the borders closed. So I was like, well, that's how I ended up in Australia. And so I also want to caveat that there's intention to maintain agility, but most of it is just open to what life brings as well, in alignment with what matters to me.
Yeah, when the door slams shut, make sure you're where you want to be at that moment.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, there's an intentionality that guides it, but the specifics, there's an openness to the specifics. I think that is how I'd put it.
What values have you either chosen to leave behind or had to leave behind along the way to where you are now?
I think the biggest thing was that definition of success and ambition, which has changed rather than left. I think another one has probably been, I think it's a positive, in that the people pleasing. I'm sort of a recovering people pleaser. And so being able to really attune with myself and my boundaries and navigating life a little bit more solidly in me rather than in what's expected of me. And feeling okay saying no has been something that I really valued cultivating over time. And I think increasingly, I think boundaries are discussed in lots of different ways. But for me, boundaries delivered kindly actually also creates certainty and a sense of safety. That can be in personal relationships. I see it a lot in work relationships. When we establish expectations, norms of behavior, what is and isn't acceptable, what's expected of someone, what's not. When it's delivered in a certain way and open to negotiation, for example, around what's expected, or, what's being delivered, it creates a clarity that makes it means that people know what they need to do, know how they will behave, know what to expect of others as well, rather than being really uncertain about whether things are going to shift constantly. So I think when applied in the right way, boundaries can create safety for everyone, as long as everyone also feels comfortable sharing their own.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you just basically described so many of the virtues of boundaries. Instead of it being a way to keep things out, it's a way to support things and make things better and even maximize them in the right conditions.
Absolutely. I think boundaries are often seen as something like punishment, and sometimes in the way that they're applied, they're not applied in the way boundaries should be. They're applied in, I'm doing this to punish, or there's a lot of confusion about what they are, I think. But when they're coming from an intent of nourishing self and nourishing others and the system that we work in, I think that they can be really healthy.
What kind of impact do you hope to create?
Oh, what a juicy question. I feel like that's something that I've been asking myself a lot and always have. And I think really for me, I mean, there's that saying, once you get a certain amount of wealth, like it's never enough for some, that you just want more and more and more. I think I have to reflect on whether I feel the same with impact, being like, oh, but that's not enough. Like, need to do more and more and more. Like, okay, but I've done this much. There's always striving for bigger and more. And I have to really check myself on that. I think the most meaningful impact for me, I think there are a lot of things, a lot of ways that everyone can impact the world. And I think it's really great that we align with the things that have the most meaning to us. Um, and I think for me, one of the greatest things is helping people feel safe, grounded, and connected. And because those are so big in my life and my values, to help people feel seen, heard, and valued. And then to be able to translate that into something bigger for collective well-being, like shifting systems so that we create environments where people can thrive. They're not fighting against like the river to try and get basic well-being. It's just like, no, the environment enables that. And so I guess it's both at a systems level and it's also at an individual level, with the desired greater overall impact being to create a world where we can thrive. And it's like, that's the natural path, is to thrive in the best way possible.
You've opened the door now to individual versus system level, and all this talk of valuing connection and impact. Are system level connection, change, impact, leadership different than individual level, or what's the relationship, if any, there that you see?
I think there's a big interplay between them all. So I guess I started looking at more systems level with geopolitics, and then I moved into the yoga and the coaching, which is down to the individual, and then the organizational, where I am now, and sort of look at how we can connect all those threads together. And I became more interested, in the individual when I was in geopolitics and looking at waves of nationalism and populism, and why do, for example, strongmen leaders, what drives people to support them, or what drives them to, scatter peace efforts that we're trying to negotiate, or, what drives someone to be a certain way that actually impacts the whole world. And so that's what actually drove me to try and go into that individual level and learning about intergenerational trauma and how, whole societies can be impacted. And then how do we actually support the healing of, for example, an entire state? And so that's where that link came from. And so I think the two are inextricable. And one thing that I sort of say is that you can't breath work your way out of a climate crisis. You can't meditate your way out of a housing crisis. We can't sort of say, oh, look, the stress is just on you. Like, maybe you need to learn to self-regulate better, when people just don't have like the basic food, shelter, safety that they need. And so I think there's a balance of like, yes, absolutely, we have to take responsibility for ourselves, for our own well-being. And we have to be really cognizant of what we're doing as a society to enable or to damage our ability to do that. And that's something I'm really interested in, but that's also why I feel like it's very hard to take the two apart. It's like, no matter how much yoga you do, it's not possible. It's not going to outweigh, significant unemployment, for example. We need, or like toxic air. Like, no matter how much yoga you do, if you're breathing toxic air, like, you're not going to be healthy.
Yes. It would be a pretty snake oil salesman yoga teacher to pretend that you could, transmute all of the toxins in the air and not be affected by them.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, all the people who are practicing and teaching these things, like, they're amazing practices. And as I know you're an avid meditation practitioner. And so, these are all very important things to have, but we also have to combine them with like available healthcare, clean waterways, and in looking after nature. So that's like the bigger system of our society, I think, views nature in a quite extractive way. Like, it's we take, there's no giving back, and we're depleting it. And so how are we possibly going to thrive in those conditions? So it's looking at how do we look at individual within all the systems, the culture, the financial, the social structures, the environment, physical and natural environment that we're in, and sort of make it conducive to thriving, which is possibly why I find your question quite challenging, because I'm like, well, one person doesn't do that. That takes such numbers of people across so many different fields to be able to make those shifts. So it's, that's where we come with setting realistic expectations for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything that you're describing about the work that you do and the things that you're learning, I'm hearing how the curiosity is so central and the continuous learning is so central. And I'm also noticing this implicit undercurrent that this stuff can get heavy. And how does that, when it gets heavy, how does that impact the playfulness that you want to embody?
Yeah.
How do you get pulled off track, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's where the balance comes in for just having the creative outputs. The movement is big for me. And being able to hold multiple realities at the same time of, there can be grief and there can be joy. I sort of think about like the whole full spectrum of human emotions and human experience that it's possible to experience. And if we want to lock it down and not feel bad, we also equally can never feel good. Like, we lock it into this very narrow range. But the more that we have the capacity to feel, it goes out in every direction. And so that has been very challenging for me, because the greater depth of feeling means also greater depth of grief, of despair, which I didn't have, no one really gets choices in those often unless there is like a survival mechanism to shut it down, which there are many people. But it also has given me greater capacity to feel joy and to play and to value what I do have. And I think finding that balance has been a lifelong thing and will always be a lifelong thing. But I guess being able to also be snapped out of it by people around you has also been very helpful of like, okay, now we can leave this behind. Now we can have a little giggle in the kitchen. Like I'm very also grateful for being around others that can help balance that. And that's also actually going to a value that I've left behind is hyper independence. So that's an interplay there.
I love that you naturally went to a place of sharing something that you've kind of left behind and evolved away from. As you stand now in the present day and you look ahead at what's to come, maybe you have a clear vision, maybe you don't, you can let us know. Do you have a sense for values that you'd like to have be more central for you in the future that aren't quite there yet?
Yeah, two come to mind. So one is around creativity, which I genuinely do value. I'm learning to lean into it more though, because I feel like I still have held myself back a lot. And so I'm really learning to dive in and also broaden my definition of what creativity is. So what's coming up for that is, I started learning stencil art last year as a project. So my partner taught me, and then he suggested that we do a joint exhibition at Adelaide Fringe Festival, which we did. And that was amazing and so interesting and very fulfilling. And so leaning more into that creativity, we're doing an exhibition later in the year in Melbourne, creativity picnics. So people just show up with whatever they're working on and we get to do that together in a group, interviewing people, getting to learn more about them. That is a form of creativity as well, and creating a shared experience. So really leaning into the different forms of creativity, taking the beginner's mindset to learn new mediums is a big part of it. I think the other thing is really getting back to some of the practices for connection to self, because I feel like I got to a certain stage and I was like, I'm feeling great. And then some of them fell off. And it's not that I'm not feeling great, but I've definitely noticed that I want to continue to really, really nourish and cultivate that connection through some of the original ways that I had. I was exploring new ones, but I really want to go back to some of the more original ones. So the creativity and the spaciousness for self-care.
I feel like I heard you describe just a deeper integration of the things that are already present for you. Almost
Yes.
like mastery of them is kind of how it came across. Not declaring that you have it now, but that's the path forward. Is that kind of tracking with how you feel about it?
I love that framing of it. Yes, absolutely. And I think feeling less of a rush to have, the clarity on the purpose or the impact, and being like, actually, I've got a lot of sort of trains that are moving along and I'm going to allow this process to emerge.
I wonder if I could paint a scenario for you where you're given the attention of the entire world, as impossible as that may sound, for a short period of time, and you can advocate for one value that you believe that everyone would be better off if they would embrace this a little more centrally for themselves. What would you advocate for, and what would your pitch be to them about that?
Yeah, I love this scenario. Totally overwhelming scenario for the whole world to be watching. But what a great analogy. I think for me, it would be curiosity. And I say that because the way I see curiosity as a value is it can be applied in a lot of ways. So I can apply curiosity to myself, to be curious about what's happening inside me, to be able to, understand what's important to me, what my values are, what my boundaries are. But it also means that I can be less defensive. I can, be curious about my reactions to things, and that strengthens connection. If I'm taking curiosity in other parts of my life, it means that, I can be curious about people who don't have the same views about me or as me. So there's less judgment. We can sort of help bridge political divides. We can get really curious about, wow, where did that belief come from? Where did that idea come from? Where did that political stance come from? And really get curious about people and maybe the fears that underlie it, and then be able to relate on that level rather than what initially hits the surface. And that would go both ways. And I also think curiosity helps to strengthen some of the other values that I think are really important, around love, generosity, compassion, empathy. And because when you think about, or kindness, when you think about kindness or love, I think that humans want to be seen, heard, and known. And if that's a form of love, when we love something or someone, we're curious about them. We want to know about them, what's going on in their inner world. If we want to be kind, yes, we can be kind, but if we understand their needs, we can actually be kinder because we're able to meet them. And so having curiosity about others means that we can love better, we can be kinder, we can be less judgmental with others and ourselves, and hopefully bridge some of the big polarities that we're seeing in the world.
Curiosity, the way you just described it, sounds like the ultimate positive gateway drug.
That's another description. If it was in pill form, I'm sure it'd go hell well.
What I heard is if you're willing to walk through this one door, it opens up so many other doors. And on the other side, you can find compassion and creativity, and you will keep learning. And oh my gosh, I love the way that it really looks like it's the tree trunk that so many things blossom from, is the way that you painted it.
Yes, I love that description. That and the doorway. Yeah, absolutely. That is, now that you've said it, I think that is definitely how I see it. Yeah.
Could you let people know briefly if they want to stay in touch with you or follow your work, and whether it's your impact or your playful creative side, how can they do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the best initial place is probably LinkedIn, which we can link here. I do have a couple of Instagram pages. I will link you to one that has the art, and then one that will soon focus a bit more on the podcast. But otherwise, always happy to chat. Drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm always interested to learn and grow and hear interesting stories from interesting people. So yeah, there will be more in this space, but those are the main points at this stage.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing with people today. And I really admire your journey, the places you've been willing to continue learning and continue exploring because of that curiosity that you've advocated so well for. So thank you. That's all for this episode of Because This Matters. I believe that these are conversations that matter. If something from this conversation spoke to you, please consider sharing it with someone. Maybe take a moment to rate, follow, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. You can learn more about my work as a coach and speaker at markpoise.com. Until next time, remember that a life aligned with values is a fulfilled one.